Last week of the season, last week of the year, let's talk about the cards that are going to release in January using our 1 to 5 star rating system. As always, if you enjoy my content, please like, subscribe, leave a comment. Every bit of that helps me out. We are going to start with Shaolo, the Undying, a 5/8 monstrous dragon with an intriguing on-reveal ability that gives +3 power to the card you played before Shaolo for every turn you have played 2 or more cards. Now, my best guess is that this is mostly in the 9 to 12 range, which is to say that this card at 5/8 is mostly across 2 bodies, going to be a 5/17 to a 5/20. It's possible that you can get it as high as the 15 mark. That is a thing that will likely happen a lot more rarely than you think. And there are a couple of plausible ways for you to get it to actually hit on all 6 turns. Things like Dormammu's spell costing 0 might be a reasonable way to try to build for that. But largely, I think this is just going to be 5/17 across 2 bodies most of the time that you play it. Now, the card this reminds me of the most is a zombie giant man that doesn't require as much from you. The thing about zombie giant man is it is still a really good card. It's just being held back by the amount of Shadow King in the metagame, which has led to Annihilus Sentry packages, which, to be fair to Sentry, also have some extra synergy with Merlin, being the dominant things that happen in these Merlin werewolf mid-rangey decks that you see a lot of. I think there's a very real chance that Shaolo goes in there and is just instantly a better card, but it does have a notable potential weakness to Shadow King, even though that weakness is significantly less than the weakness of Zombie Giant Man, because this A has a better body than Zombie Giant Man, and B, you cannot have the thing that gives this card power Shadow Kinged the way you can with your Zombie Horde to prevent Zombie Giant Man from being good. That is a relevant difference here. It makes this much more of a normal card, where Zombie Giant Man is especially vulnerable to Shadow King. This card is just the normal amount of vulnerable to Shadow King. I think this card could be a legitimate major player. I think it's very possible that the Annihilus Sentry stuff just isn't all that good, and we would much rather be playing Shaolo and another 3-cost tech card type of thing in those Wolf Merlin decks. In fact, I would be willing to bet that that is the most likely outcome for what this card will be doing. I think it is an absolute stud. I think it's very hard to make a good 5, and this 5 solves for a couple of really important things. First, it doesn't die to 1 tech card, and second, it has the ability to spit blit power across multiple locations. I think this card is going to be quite good. I think it'll be tied with Merlin, which will make it tied with Werewolf. I think it'll be part of those kind of decks because they are so clearly able to play multiple cards in a turn. This strikes me as the build around 5, or has the potential to be the build around 5 for the mid-range deck as it exists in January. I would not be surprised if this card was the best card in the entire season. To me, I think this is a 4.5 star card, a very powerful card that is only held back by its extremely limited gameplay potential. You can only do this in a couple of spaces. So if at any point something else ends up better than it, or if the metagame changes such that the things that it is doing are valued less, you will end up lower on this card. However, I do think that in terms of bang for the buck at 5, this is going to be one of the best 5-drops in the game in the archetype that it goes in, and that the archetype that it goes in is extremely powerful right now. That archetype, of course, being Merlin Werewolf midrange. Next up is Lockheed, a 2/1 with an end of turn ability that if you played a 1-cost card this turn, afflict an enemy card here with -2 power. Now, the placement of the word here is pretty notable because this doesn't say if you played a 1-cost card here. It afflicts the enemies here, but you don't need to play on this card's location, which is a lot freer than a lot of other cards that are in this space, right? Like, you think a lot of other cards that either A, key off of a certain cost of card being played, like Joaquin Torres, you got to play at his location, or key off of cards being played are cards that key off of cards being played on their location, right? Like, you look at something like Hope Summers, you got to play on the Hope Summers. Zombie Scarlet Witch, got to play on the Zombie Scarlet Witch. You do not have to do that with Lockheed, and that is, I think, the biggest thing that this card has going for it, which is that it is just very reasonably a card that is, of course, in conjunction with Kitty Pryde, but also in conjunction with any deck that runs a lot of ones. Thanos comes to mind. You will be able to play a lot of different things. One other deck that loops ones comes to mind, and I don't think it's really going to make it work here, but I do think it's worth pointing out. Deadpool headpool decks also loop ones, and if you're looping ones, you at least think about this card. I do think it's likely to be Kitty Pryde-ish, and unfortunately, I wonder if this card is strong enough to go in the Merlin Wolf decks, considering how much of Shadow King Merchants those decks are, and how much Deafening Chord is running around. I worry this card simply doesn't hold up, because it doesn't trigger a wolf, and kind of doesn't do a lot if you aren't Merlining, because you can't really play Kitty Pryde in those decks because that doesn't trigger wolf. The relative anti-synergy between Kitty Pryde and Werewolf by Night is actually, if anything holds this card back, probably what would do it. And I think that this card is a lot less simple than Shaolo, a lot much smaller dragon here, and I think it fits into the metagame a lot less. But I still do think that what this card is doing on a fundamental level is pretty powerful. The decoupling of where it is. I can very easily see this card being a good card. I find it hard to see this card being a great card. So I will say that this is about a 3 to a 3.5 star card would be where my head is at. I think it is good. I think it is very unlikely to be great. Could be as low as 2.5, could be as high as 3.5. We're going to ballpark it at 3. Majestic Wingbeat, a 1-cost skill with an on reveal that gives the leftmost card in your hand +2 power. If it's 5 cost or higher, -1 cost 2. I think one of the things that these cheap skills have really given me is an appreciation for effects that do not use board space. I've talked about board space on this channel, I think, ad nauseum. But one of the things that I think, if you come from other card games, you don't really get about Marvel Snap intuitively, is that board space is kind of the card advantage of Marvel Snap in a way that is not exactly one-to-one, but it is a resource that I don't think people think enough about. When you compare this and America Chavez is more points, but this doesn't use a spot on the board with a card that is a 1-2. And I think if there is a big, meaningful advantage to playing this card over something like America Chavez, it is almost always going to be in the context of you are a deck that cares about your board space and can't afford to use some of it on America Chavez. The other use case for this card is Galactus. And I think the more skills they make, the more you got to think about Galactus, because fundamentally, skills in Galactus do have synergy, because the more you're able to spend your energy on things that impact the board but don't actually prevent you from playing Galactus in a lane, the better your Galactus is, in much the same way that goblins and Galactus have natural synergy. The more skills they make, the better they are. That is always going to be a buff to Galactus as long as the skill is playable in his deck. It's just a question of how much it is going to be a buff. Now, I'm not saying this is going to create Galactus archetypes, but I do think that it is the kind of thing that you have to keep an eye on. If you're the developers of Marvel Snap, you got to take a look at, like, all right, well, what are our skills actually allowed to do? Because the bigger they get, the more impactful they get, the less we are able to reasonably allow Galactus to be around. Now, I don't think this is going to break Galactus, but there is another G card that is worth pointing out in the context of this, and that is Zombie Galacti, which I think this is just a really good card for. One of the things that is really apparent to me right now about Marvel Snap is it's really bad to be a Magic deck, and Zombie Galacti is a deck that, you know, I don't think people really respect. I think that they're probably wrong about not really respecting it, but if it's a Magic deck, you're allowed to disrespect it, and it'll probably just be fine anyway. I think it is unlikely that this makes it not a Magic deck, but the more it gets towards actually being a turn 6 deck, the more I like the idea of playing Zombie Galacti. And this, of course, would be -1 cost on it, +2 power, obviously what the deck wants. Now, I do think that Zombie Galacti, since it is so based on putting all your stuff on the board, is probably still going to be a little bit too tied to Magic for me to ever respect. But I do think that it's also worth mentioning in this context when we talk about Majestic Wingbeat. This is a card that also could potentially have some interesting implications in, like, you know, you've seen those Joaquin Torres Zombie Giant Man decks. Like, I can see this kind of thing happening. Largely, though, I think it's mostly going to do unfair things, but there is going to be a point at which Joaquin Torres gets enough support that doing pretty much any one-cost skill on him is really, really good. I think that's entirely possible. I'm going to say that this card is about a 2.5. I think that it could be a powerful card, but I think that ultimately a lot of the things that it enables are not the kind of things that have top-end metagame sticking power and are much more like, with all due respect, a butt or Jay-Walla thing to do. Dragon of the Moon, 3/2 on reveal, steal 1 power from even-costed cards in all hands. I mean, I think there is a lot of power in this ability at this rate. I think you could reasonably say that I'm playing this and it's probably gonna be like, since if you count the steal from my hand as like potentially an upside in the sense that it becomes realized immediately, and the steal from their hand is obviously like you count that as like some amount of more than 1 point for each 1 point that it gets. I would say that this is like a reasonable card, but I just don't see it. I just don't see a way to actually make me want to play this card in the year 2026. I don't see what I'm supposed to be doing with this. If you say Master Mold, I'm going to start laughing. I'm just not there with this. This is the card that makes me really want to like stress definitions, because I think people think of cards as like unplayable, right? Like, this is terrible. I saw someone on Twitter when Maverick came out. They were getting mad that people said that Surfer was finally playable now, right? They're like, who are these people who are saying Surfer is unplayable? And it's like, I don't think people understand the context in which words like that are used. They mean like unplayable at a high level, meaning that something else in the same niche is doing something better than you would be an idiot to play the second or third best deck in the exact same metagame space as something that is doing or occupying that metagame space more efficiently. I think that a lot of people hear people talk like that, and they don't really have like the depth of context to understand that, like, for that thing, like a 52% win rate deck that exists in a metagame with a 55% win rate deck that is doing that thing better, that 52% win rate deck can still be unplayable. That's not what Surfer was, and that's not what this is, but I bring this up to say that I think that people take those terms to mean something that they are not intended to mean. And maybe that's a problem with the terms. Maybe we shouldn't be using those terms, but I will say I think it's been enough time that we can use those terms that it's probably okay. I bring this up to say that this card is not like... Marvel Snap is actually a remarkably well-balanced game. I think there are very few cards that are actually unplayable, right? I don't understand why this card would ever be a card I would choose to play if I were trying to win games. I think that is the biggest thing. And that's not to say like, oh my God, you'll never win with this, which is I think what a lot of people hear. When I call something bad, they're like, it means that I'll never win with this. And then the fact that I did win with this means that KM is wrong. This card is good. Marvel Snap is really well balanced. A lot of bad stuff can still win because of the miracle of like generally mid-rangey metagames when you can actually make good decisions about where to allocate your points. A deck that is much worse can still beat a deck that is much better. And I think that is a lot of the magic of Marvel Snap. But that doesn't mean that the deck was good. It just means that you won. Like, that's a very different thing. Did the deck do its job of helping you, or were you carrying the deck? A lot of the time when we talk about cards, you got to think about it in terms of their competition, and you got to think about it in terms of who is doing the carrying. Because there's a lot of bad decks that a good player can win with. If you're better than your opponent, you can win with a lot of stuff. But that doesn't make the deck good. It means that you're carrying a bad deck. And what decks need to do is carry you. They got to be doing their part. At the very least, they got to be as good as you are, or you're wasting your time. And this is a card that strikes me that I just don't see it ever being a thing that I would want to do. And I'm like maybe the most Moon Knight, Goon Knight pilled man on the planet. I would want to do that, but like, oh, I'm going to put this in my Moon Knight deck. I'm going to discard one of their even cost cards. It's going to steal less power. Oh, I'm going to put this in my Master Mold deck. It's going to be kind of okay. Get Shadow Kinged. Like, I can win games with a Master Mold deck in this. I'm sure I could. It's probably not the end of the world. You could do that. it's just never going to be the right choice for a deck that is doing that kind of stuff. It's just never going to be the best choice you could make. And I can't see this card ever being part of anything that would ever be the best choice you could make. I'm going to call this a 1-star card. Lin Lie, Iron Fist, on reveal to 2, add the Sword of Fuxi to another location. The Sword of Fuxi, also a 2/2 ongoing. If Lin Lie is here, he has +7 power. In other words, this is a card that is very, very good on rate, like just baseline 2/4 across multiple locations. It is notably 2 cards with 2 different abilities if you're playing an Aurora deck. It is a card that has a lot of synergy with things that can move your own stuff, but and I do think this is a concern, I am not entirely sure that it is worth the use of the board space. So what I mean by that is, if you do this with a Madam Web, I think it is probably pretty awesome, right? You have made a 2/11, you have only used 2 board slots, you are probably actually balling out. I can totally see that being a thing I want to do in a world where I'm playing a sort of irisy thing for steps, Batroc, Madam Web move deck. I'm super into that. If I am using Ghost Spider to do this, I am suddenly saying, 3 energy, 14 power, 3 board slots. We've talked about board slots a lot. I think the rate on this card is really good. I think the deck it goes in, the sort of Iris, Batroc midrange stuff, is really good. I worry that this card has so much competition that it might not be able to make itself actually show up. But what I will say is that, honest to God, this much power for this little investment, I can very easily see this card making sense. Like, I think it is very reasonable to look at this card and say, it only really does one thing. I get that. But in much the same way as I think Shaolo is filling a need in Merlin Werewolf decks, I think it's very possible that this card is filling a need in the Iris deck for just simply more beef. When you see someone play Lin Lie and then Ghost Spider the Lin Lie to the location of the blade, and you look at that and you're like, damn, that's actually just 14 power there. It's turn 3. I'm playing a Gladiator, right? That seems quite good. Like, that seems like quite a good thing to do. It is notably not vulnerable to Shadow King because it is ongoing on the Sword of Fuxi. I think this is a sort of extremely niche card, but one that I can see being quite powerful. I'm going to say 3.5-star card here, only for the potential uses in the Iris deck. If this card does not make it into Madam Web Thing First Steps midrange, this card is terrible. So that is kind of where I'm at on this. I guess the alternate version is this is a card that goes in whatever Aurora pile you're playing. I bet there is an Aurora deck that can do this, but I also suspect it will probably be running Madam Web and Thing First Step, so I'm going to consider myself covered on that. I think this card is cool, interesting, and powerful. I think it is so limited in terms of home that if it doesn't make it into that home, it will not have any other homes. So while I do think I am pretty high on this card, it is so weird and so specific that I'm a little bit afraid to rank it any higher. My least favorite card of the season by a wide margin, Fang Foom, I think is unfortunately a pretty good card. And I think this largely because you're going to put him in Hela and he's going to be really stupid. You bring back this, you bring back the Infinite. That's just really big. This is the greatest Hela card they have ever made. It is extremely devastatingly powerful, and I see absolutely no way to stop it that isn't Stardust. This is just the kind of thing that Hela is crying out for. It is a 7-cost card, so obviously it does not conflict with your very powerful 6s. Hela loves having 7s. As a deck that plays Corvus, you can even hard cast this some of the time. This is a card, of course, I should probably read it out. 7/12, on reveal ability, gain the power of front row enemy cards here. So if you're playing some sort of Man Spider combo deck, sorry, dude. Hey, good luck with that. This is a really powerful card. I think it is one of the better cards in the season. I think it is doing and incentivizing things that I really don't like. I would vastly prefer if this was not a Hela card and was instead a card people were playing in ramp decks, because I think it's a much more interesting card in a ramp deck than it is in a Hela deck, because you actually have to think about where the card is going to go instead of just cheating it into play. My instinct is that this card will probably go in both of those decks. I could see it very easily going in both of those decks. I mean, this is an absolute monster. Those are decks that not only have ways to cheat it into play, but also to get it to 7 energy and play it fairly. Card is big. I expect it to mostly be like a 720 plus most of the time you play it. It's going to be a big, big boy. I think this is a very powerful card that will do relatively powerful things. And I also think that ramp is strong enough right now that this card is going to have a lot of homes in, well, not necessarily a lot of homes, but like 3/6 Luna Snow, 3/5 Electro, 3/6 Wave. This was not how things were a little bit ago. And I think that it's just going to be like, there's going to be decks that are doing this. It's going to be pretty good. People might try like Red Wing stuff with it. People might try Hela stuff with it. I think it's just going to be a pretty solid, powerful card that does a lot of big numbers. Obviously, a lot of big number decks get gated by synergy decks, but a lot of the decks that are able to play this card are also able to play things like Cosmic Ghost Rider, so some inbuilt synergy countering there. I would worry, frankly, if I were a ramp player, my big worry with this card is that it would put Hela over me. Now, Hela, much more easily countered. Stardust, of course, is a reasonable, like, door slammer on there. But I do think that, like, the number one thing this card makes me afraid of is Hela. The number two thing this card makes me afraid of is ramp. I think this is a 4-star card. I think this is just strong. It's what a 7-drop is supposed to look like. New Shang-Chi 3/5 game start. The 10 rings starts in your hand. On reveal, unlock their potential. The 10 rings, of course, are a 2/1 with an on reveal. Give +1 power to another card at this location. When they are upgraded, that on reveal turns into end of turn and all cards at this location. So you get a repeated end of turn buff, but this card has been nerfed from other data mine versions. Many people who have watched my videos religiously, all of you top 0.5 percenters, you will know that I thought this card was incredibly broken. I thought this card was incredibly broken because at the time that I first saw it, it had an end of turn ability on the unupgraded rings, which meant that both the unupgraded rings and the upgraded rings were repeatedly triggering your Sebastian Shaw, your Clea. Now only the upgraded rings are repeatedly doing that, which means a lot more of this card is wrapped up in the power of the upgraded ability of the rings, which is probably just a much safer thing than giving people permanent access to infinite Clea procs on turn 2 of the game that starts in their opening hand. Very, very smart choice to make that not happen, but it does change a lot about how you want to play this card. It is much more tied to Shang himself, and the rings at base are much worse. You would not play a 2/1 that gives +1 power to something in any deck. This is now actually a card with a downside and an upside, or a downside that is mitigated by the upside. I think this is now a very fair card. I think that it is very possible that it ends up being good, but it's gone from I am the most terrified of this card ever to I think it is entirely possible this card ends up bad. I have the least powerful read on this card because there are a couple things about this that I just don't know. And I know people in the comments are going to be like, it's obviously one way or it's obviously the other way. And I think that is sort of demonstrative of this. I don't know a couple of things about this. I've looked into the wording of the game start. Something that starts in your hand does not necessarily imply that it starts in your hand for free. The wording of Agatha, the wording of Quicksilver, it does not necessarily imply that you get an extra free piece of material. If this card is giving you that card for free, if the 10 rings just starts in your opening hand as an extra piece of cardboard every game, I think it is still one of the strongest cards they've ever made. If it is actually taxing you a hand space, the way Quicksilver is, I think this card is much weaker. I know this is a card rating video, but I do think that that distinction is so incredibly crucial to this card's function. If this card is giving you an extra piece of cardboard that is sometimes good, but you don't have to play or get value out of, it's just a free thing that starts in your hand, this is a 5-star card. If this card is not doing that, This is a 3 or below star card. And I think that, like, I don't like doing 2 ratings, but I genuinely am not sure how this card works. And that distinction is quite important. And frankly, I don't know that we're going to learn how it works until it actually comes out. This is not the kind of thing that I expect to get the knowledge of from the video. I just don't know. Dragon Lord 5/5 on reveal. Put a card from your hand here. I mean, Red Wing decks are into this. Hella decks are probably into this. This seems like a card that, at first glance, probably pretty terrible, countered by Stardust. I get that. And I think that that is largely the biggest argument against this kind of card being good. But I can see a world where we're doing like Dracula, Red Wing, here's a bunch of power, and that's a reasonable thing to do in this metagame. I can totally see that. This is a very plausible card to me. I don't know that it does anything other than like yeet Fang Foom at people, but that's a powerful thing to be doing. And I think what it probably does maybe is bridge the gap between these other Infinite decks and Hela in terms of ease of cheating things in. Because with Fang and Infinite, if you're playing both of them and you don't have any ramp, this is like a very reasonable thing to do. But like if you do have ramp and your hand is just all giant dorks, which a lot of these ramp decks look like right now, you can do some really powerful stuff with this. I've also seen people playing like Nick Fury Isan stuff recently. This is probably a pretty good card in that context. Free 6s that you get to play for free are pretty good. Pull one off Isan, pull one off this. I could totally see that being a relevant thing. I'm not like overly confident that deck exists, but I think there are things you can do with this. I would guess that this is a better card than it looks like it is, but I don't know if it ever... In order for it to get a high rating here, I think I would have to be pretty confident that it would make, you know, ramp and or whatever cheaty thing a better deck. And I'm not that confident it would, because a lot of what I like about ramp right now is that it's powerful, but it also has access to a lot of, like, you know, it's Cosmic Ghost Rider, it's Enchantress, it's Legion. Those are the cards this is competing with. If you want to play Red Wing, you take those cards out of the ramp deck. It makes it worse. I don't know. I think that this is likely a card that ups the ability of the deck to output points, but that's not necessarily what the deck wants to be all of the time. It could be sufficient on points and care more about interaction. I think this is an okay card that has the potential to be much better than it will end up being, but largely I would guess this is about a 2.5 star card. I don't think that it's going to make it out of the morass of various ways to cheat as the best way to cheat. I think it's very possible that it is cool and awesome and feels good when you play it, but I don't necessarily know that it has everything you'd want. All right, y'all. Thank you so much for watching. As always, I've been KMBest. You've been phenomenal, and I will see you in the next one.